Okay, let's open it up straight away for questions then. Should we start in the middle over here? Yeah, please. If you could say where you're from.
Yeah, my name is Zev Portner. I'm a law lecturer at Buckinghamshire University. Firstly, Sunday, I would like to disagree with you on something. I thought the dome was wonderful. I went to the dome 3 times, and I remember there was even discussion to keep it open for a while. And I remember towards the end, people really enjoying it. I think the man and woman on the Clapham bus, they certainly enjoyed going to the dome, and also later on it became a wonderful regeneration in South East London with the Millennium Dome and the biggest entertainment industry. But my question is this: if David Miliband had become leader in 2010, would we have seen the continuation possibly of the New Labour project in some form in 2015?
Okay, let's take another couple. If we could head over there.
Hi, I'm Tariq Abu Shadi. I'm a political scientist at Oxford. I'm wondering about things being attributed to New Labour that have happened in virtually all other Western European countries. So we've seen higher middle class support for the left. We've seen more women in parliament, higher acceptance of sexual minorities. Also, the perspective that culture wars aren't as strong here as in other countries, I think I would slightly disagree with, especially if you see that the Brexit debate largely happened on that dimension. So if these things happen in virtually all other Western European countries, how can we attribute them to New Labour?
That's a great question. Any others? Could we come there?
Thank you very much. I'm Stephen Hockman. I found Will's account of the way Labour handled things after about 2006 absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure that we've ever heard the story told quite so explicitly before. But my question is it too late? Isn't it possible for Labour under Keir Starmer to revisit all those things and to move towards the objectives that, Will, you were setting out? And if it is still possible, then how should Keir go about it?
Great. So, Will, could we start with you in response to those?
Well, just very quickly, I think that if David had succeeded in becoming leader of the Labour Party before the election in 2010, I think that Labour would have won it. And the New Labour project would have then, I think, continued and been more intelligent about business and finance than it had been up until that moment. I don't think he's still here, but David always was an advocate of stakeholder capitalism. It's now become rather fashionable, but he was a convert right from the beginning. Thank you for your point about I don't know whether you heard Keir on the Today programme on, I think it was Tuesday, I can't remember if it was Monday or Tuesday of this week. He was bowled a question by the presenter about how he kind of won the leadership by making these promises on common ownership. And what was he going to do about his promise on common ownership? Was he going to stand by his promise to nationalise? And it was one of the most uncomfortable moments in the interview, if you heard it. He absolutely slid away from it. He had nothing to say. He didn't want to say, I stand by my kind of leadership campaign and I will nationalise kind of all the privatised utilities. He doesn't want to, he'd be wrong to, it'd be expensive. It's not the way to arrive at that objective. One of the ways you could do it, building on their kind of stakeholder capitalism ideas, is to require every privatised utility to declare itself a public benefit company and to write the commitment to deliver public benefit as the prime objective of the organisation into its articles of association. The state should take a £1 share in each utility, a foundation share, and that would allow it to appoint one, if not, or possibly two, non-executive directors whose job would be to ensure that actually the utility actually did deliver public benefit as its prime focus. That would cost, given about 50 quid, and you would receive, and the state would achieve, and we, the public, would achieve all the objectives of nationalisation. Now, I'm hoping that actually the Labour shadow cabinet pick an idea like that up. It's the kind of idea that actually New Labour could have picked up in its years in office. So there are things that can be rescued. There are ideas that can be built on. There's more to be said about that. I think that actually one could require companies to write a declaration of purpose, not voluntarily, as they are under the UK Corporate Governance Code, but mandated by law, kind of into their Articles of Association, and then have to report on it. And you would resurrect the operating and financial review that New Labour abolished in 2006. So, there's stuff there that, but how you sell that, but there's lots that could be done.
The dome's a brilliant regeneration project for Greenwich, and I live not far from there myself. It just wasn't a national story that people heard because it didn't have a voice, but the Olympics did do that, so I accept that challenge. I'm very sceptical. I know lots of you are anoraks about the Labour Party. I'm very sceptical about comparative Milibandism making all of the difference. What was interesting about David Miliband, I think, today is just actually New Labour was quite policy rich. In 1997, it thought it was a very cautious, timid project, managing expectations. It didn't know what the cultural expectations would be because of the scale of it, and it was going to get bolder. It didn't actually get bolder. If you by 2001, it's actually become quite sloganistic. I think forward, not back, and so on, compared to the work that was done in 97. But it thinks the really big issues by then are things like the right model to reform the public services, very important. But actually, these much bigger identity questions are coming up, financial questions. So it's just a bigger thing. I think some of that policy reform is really important. I mean, on race, which I was talking about, there's a massive gain in what happened in London schools, because what happens in London schools means that sort of nationally the inter-ethnic white ethnic minority aggregate gap has gone in Britain. Ethnic minority Britons are slightly more likely to be university graduates than white Britons. You need to see that play through into the workplace and so on. But that's a massive achievement, especially driven by London outcomes and spreading out. So there are big policy achievements, but I just think the questions have changed by then. And I want to push back a little bit about this comparative question. Of course, it's correct to say that social democratic parties are always having the difference. If you look internationally, you can spot the differences. It's very interesting. Macron just won massively with the over 65s in France, because of the legacy of fascism being something that, old people. The German Social Democrats have just done massively well with the over 65s, and struggled with young people who vote Green. Whereas the Democrats and Labour have this thing. So that's not something that happens in all democracies. That's something that happens in Britain and America. Why is that? So these questions play out differently. The challenge, I think, for British Social Democrats is that Britain actually has quite West European, Northwest European attitudes on tax and spend and having a health service and so on that make us unlike Americans, but we identify with English-speaking countries, and so we talk about the Australian immigration system, and then we import over the internet American debates about identity that really don't fit very well in Britain, and you really don't want the sort of Trump and post-Trump tone of politics about identity to be the way you do these things, but it's quite hard to do it because you're following the American debates absolutely intensely. We can all talk about the internal politics of leaks on the Supreme Court, much more than you're following, say, a French presidential election or a German coalition agreement. David Miliband found that very fascinating. So I think the comparative lens is interesting, but the who are we questions are very different in Spain because it's been a democracy for 30 or 40 years, or in France, because it's much more, I think, polarized than Britain or Germany. Germany is more allergic to culture wars than Britain is, for very good reasons of history, culture of the Federal Republic. So I think the comparative lens is really useful, but you have to win the argument, the who are we argument, in Germany, in France, in Britain, on sort of national terms.
Polly, did you want to come in on some of those?
I'm afraid I just missed a large chunk due to a total technical meltdown. So I don't know whether somebody answered the question about whether it's too late for Starmer to revisit some of these questions on the city, on Europe. Absolutely not. I think that Labour has to take this as a signal, today's results as a signal, that much of what it said rather tentatively, it can say a lot more forcefully. I mean, on Europe, I think increasingly the post-Brexit situation is becoming very clear to very large numbers of voters who voted for Brexit. It's not a question of trying to rescind it or trying to say we go back into Europe, but I think that the appalling relationship between Macron and Boris, and for as long as Boris Johnson stays Prime Minister, will remain a very bad relationship between Britain and France, and therefore, to some extent, Britain and Europe. I think there's every opportunity for Keir Starmer to say, this is ridiculous. Of course, we can have very good relationships in Europe. Of course, there are lots of ways we can be much closer. No, it doesn't mean trying to rescind Brexit, but it does mean making sure we're still part of Horizon, rejoining Erasmus, all kinds of things. And a better relationship will make many of the problems of trade much easier to negotiate. And so I'm optimistic that actually Labour should stop being afraid to even say the word Europe, but should plunge into that. Otherwise, they'll get tarnished with the idea that they are really Remainers. So they have to seize hold of that, say, no, we're not Remainers. We simply want a civilised relationship the way other countries do close by to the EU, and whether it's Switzerland, whether it's Norway, and to be more positive and to be less afraid of things like that. And certainly everything that Will has said about reform of the city, you can hear Rachel Reeves getting quite close to some of that. And I think, again, a bit of bravery now would be called for, now Labour's done so well today.
Great. Right, I'm getting the cue that we need to wrap up. So thank you very much. If we could all thank the panellists.